Hello, everyone, and welcome to another conversation about what truly goes on in Rwanda. My name is Denise Zaneza, and it is always my pleasure to be your host on the different topics we shall be having regarding ongoing human rights violations, the oppression, the closed political space in Rwanda, and much more about Paul Kagame's brutal dictatorship. While Paul Kagame's regime is portrayed as a model of success and democracy, the reality is very far from the picture we are used to seeing in the media due to the strong and very expensive PR machine behind the scenes. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of expression are essentially non-existent in modern Rwanda. And this situation is mainly enforced by severe punishment towards any dissenting voice. Since the RPF regime, now led by Paul Kagame, took power, many Rwandans who don't agree or don't align with the dictatorship's narrative have been targeted. Some have been jailed for political reasons, others have faced torture and repression of all kinds, and sadly, the most unlucky ones have been killed. But is there hope, and what can be done to change the ongoing tragic situation? To help us navigate this topic, we are joined by Sheila Paylan. Sheila is a human rights lawyer, a UN consultant, a speaker, and a writer who brings remarkable knowledge, value, and insight to today's conversation. Hello, Sheila. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me, Denise. It's an honor to be on your show.
Before we dive into our conversation, as I do with all my guests, can you briefly introduce yourself and share what inspired you to become a human rights lawyer?
Sure. Well, my name is Sheila Paylan. I've been an international human rights lawyer for almost 20 years now. I began my career working with the United Nations at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, so the UN-backed court that is meant to prosecute the perpetrators of the Rwandan genocide. And after almost 15 years of working at different UN-backed international courts, also as a war crimes investigator in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I decided to move to my homeland, Armenia. And from here, yes, I'm a human rights consultant. I advise governments, international organizations, and think tanks and civil society groups. What inspired me to pursue this path was really a deep sense of justice that was shaped by my own family history. I'm a descendant of Armenian genocide survivors. So I grew up hearing stories of survival from horrific atrocities and also resilience, but also stories of silence and denial. So this really instilled in me a determination to give a voice to the voiceless and also to hold people who abuse their power to account, because that's where it always begins. So yeah, for me, even though human rights, it is my full-time job, it's not just a job, it's like a calling. It's at the core of everything that I do.
I am so sorry, Sheila, for what your family went through during the genocide. Your story is remarkably a story of resilience and courage, and I am very sure that your experience and knowledge will be of great contribution to today's conversation.
Thank you.
When it comes to Rwanda, I'm very curious. Have you worked on any specific cases or been involved in particular projects there? And I'm pretty sure that the audience would like to know about the outcomes and if you faced some challenges along the way.
Sure. I mean, Rwanda is actually a huge part of my life. Like I said, I worked at the ICTR. I worked on some of the biggest cases, from the Rwandan genocide time on the appeal of Theonest Bagasora, the multiple accused Butari case. So most of my career, I was working on those big cases. But more recently, now I've sort of shifted and I've started working on the case of Victoire Ingabire. I was on the legal team that brought her case to the East African Court of Justice, seeking a declaration of the violation of her rights for being prevented from running for president in the last elections.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've also worked on a couple of other cases of unlawful detention and political dissidents and stuff. So one thing that it started early on, but of course at the beginning I was also kind of enthralled by the Rwandan success story, shifting from genocide to now and stuff. The most challenging aspect, I think, has been growing to see the huge contrast between Rwanda's international image as this development success story, and then learning about these really troubling deep undercurrents, the underbelly of repression and human rights abuses, which the whole point was for that never to happen again. Yeah.
Indeed.
So I think the outcomes vary. I publish opinion editorials. I'm not just a lawyer. I analyze and I work on authoritarianism in general. I'm very interested in how authoritarian regimes are on the rise right now. Kagame's got a good group of friends like Russia's Putin and Azerbaijan's Aliyev, to name a few. And it's really interesting to see how these guys function so similarly. They have the same modus operandi. So on some level, you can learn about one through learning from the other. Yeah. These efforts, they lead to greater awareness. Like that's the number one goal, is to make people wake up to see what's going on. There are other ways in which my efforts, go towards strategic legal action, but all the efforts, they're always against a backdrop of like surveillance and fear. This is part of the game. We have to accept that when you're trying to tackle authoritarian regimes, that's going to be a challenge. And that's how they function, to stifle dissent. So and the Rwandan context is really almost very special because it's such a small country, and yet it has such a heightened level of repression and a climate of impunity. So I think the challenge is like there's such a lack of space for meaningful dissent, both and outside of Rwanda, that more people should become aware of.
Yes, indeed. You just talked about the huge contrast about the reality regarding the ongoing human rights violations and the image that Rwandan government is selling to the world. This is an economically growing country. Everything is going well, and everyone loves Kagame. But behind the scenes, there's indeed surveillance and fear that is imposed upon the population to stifle dissent, like you just said. And I love the comparison, the way you talked about other dictatorships, like there are similarities. And we see only a handful of regimes in the world who engage in extrajudicial killings and transnational repression. But how would you assess Rwanda's role in this? And why do you think that this issue is not getting more international attention? Because it is known, like it's not a secret anymore that the government of Rwanda is doing this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's actually quite, I think, it's very surprising the hubris with which Rwanda engages in transnational repression, like tracking and harassing and targeting and sometimes killing its critics abroad. Not all authoritarian regimes would go that far. And
yes,
it's like true. It's extra, and we've seen this, for at least a decade, if not longer. These acts on foreign countries' soil of like assassinating or abducting, these are massively alarming, and it's an affront to the sovereignty of those countries in which that they take place. So even just on that, even if you don't care about human rights, that alone should garner diplomatic condemnation. It's insulting to the other country. But
That's
Rwanda doesn't care, and because they get away with it, and it's strategic. They're
Mhm.
doing it to send a terrifying message, and it has a chilling effect on anyone in exile or in the diaspora that might dare to oppose or criticize Kagame. I think there are so many reasons why this can be happening. It could just be also surprising, but the muted response by the international community. I think it's mostly just geopolitical. Rwanda has strong diplomatic
Yeah.
ties with Western countries. It has strategic peacekeeping roles. And the biggest one, I think, is still this ongoing perception of Rwanda as a development darling. And nobody wants to think that they've invested so much into this country becoming a success story when it's really not. Yeah.
Mhm.
And governments are reluctant to call out an ally, but it's not an excuse. It just makes things worse. These partnerships should come with greater scrutiny, and we're seeing the effects of silence for so many years, what it's having now, the heightened effects of that now in the DRC.
Yes, indeed. So you just mentioned the DRC and the reasons behind these political choices that countries make towards Rwanda. It's diplomatic choices that don't help the Rwandan population, whether they are in Rwanda or abroad. There's a lack of uprising because of the crushing of dissent. And I had conversations with other guests like Peter Verlinden, Judy River, Michaela Wrong, Anjan Sundaram as well, and we all came to the same conclusion. Like the crackdown on dissent is so brutal inside and outside Rwanda that it is impossible not to see it. And there's so much more behind the fact that other governments let Rwanda, do these transnational repressions, go in other countries, assassinate opposition leaders, assassinate dissent. And you mentioned Congo at the end. That is also one of the big reasons why many governments, a lot of people in the international community are silent about what is going on in Rwanda and outside of Rwanda by the Rwandan government. This conflict has been fueled by mineral exploitation, mass killings, sexual violence, and displacement of millions of people. And now we are seeing the awakening from the West with some sanctions that have been imposed, which is really good. But are they really effective? And what should the international community should be doing more to put an end to this ongoing human rights crisis in the region of the Great Lakes of Africa?
Yeah, for sure, it seems that there has been more than a bit of a wake-up call with Rwanda's full-blown invasion of the DRC. And I was actually pleasantly surprised to see the level at which there was international condemnation and sanctions being imposed. Like this is more than I've seen in other contexts that deserved it as much,
Mm-hmm.
But sanctions they're a start. They're not alone going to be the change of everything, but they're a good start. They send an important message. They send a signal that impunity won't be tolerated. That they're basically it's a big deal to impose sanctions. But because of the nature of this conflict in the DRC with Rwanda, how deeply entrenched it is, how driven by decades of exploitation it is, how so many other parties are also kind of involved. Yeah,
Yes.
it's going to take more than just sanctions. It's going to have to be Sanctions have to be smart, targeted, and they have to be consistently enforced. This is always a problem with sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
But in this context, I think if the international community is serious about change, and I think, I get the sense that they are. I think that everyone's grown a bit tired of seeing this never-ending horror movie in that region,
Yes.
has to go beyond reactive measures. Sanctions are reactive measures, and it has to start becoming part of a larger strategy that tackles the root causes, like the looting of resources and the militarization of communities and the failure to support, meaningful local governance and meaningful political opposition. The international community will come in, do something quite significant, like impose sanctions, but this is not going to end until there's a longer term investment and a more serious commitment to staying the course, to seeing this from beginning to end. Yeah. So I mean, it's hard with the world. The world seems to be on fire all the time, but this region deserves some sustained attention, I think, and longer, deeper investments that go beyond symbolic measures.
Yes, that's very correct. And you mentioned that the international community should tackle on the root cause of the problem. And indeed, sanctions can help, but they are not enough. I mean, we have seen that, for example, there was recently a Global Witness organization that conducted an investigation and found that Luxembourg, the country that didn't vote for sanctions for Rwanda, from the European Union, because actually there's a very big company called Traxys Group in Luxembourg that is working with Kagame. So, like you said, sanctions are good, but they are not enough because there can always be a workaround. And so we need to tackle on the root causes of the conflict, and that is lack of democratic governance in Rwanda. That is a real problem. Like, the international community should focus on that as well, because that is where lies the problem. There's no democracy in Rwanda. There's no rule of law in Rwanda, so the government can do whatever it wants. Paul Kagame can do whatever he wants in the country, outside the country, in the region, and nobody will be able to stop him because there is no democracy in Rwanda. And that should also be one of the priorities, in my opinion, of the international community.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. It's and I think also the international members of the international community should hold each other accountable when another member does, engages in an act that is clearly complicit in perpetuating the violence, like the one and only country that votes against EU sanctions being Luxembourg. Like, how can they get away with that? They're also at fault in that case. And so we also need to hold each other accountable for becoming part of the problem when we have an opportunity to become part of the solution.
Like you said, they are starting to wake up, but they should do more than that, and really focus on long-term solutions, long-term stability and peace in the region, and not just one-shot actions, and then after a while we are back to the same position as we were. Going forward, Sheila, I remember the first time we spoke, you said something that we'll never forget. You said, when people stay silent regarding human rights violations and just watch without taking any actions for a very long time, they actually become part of the problem. That is a very powerful statement. And my question to you is, what should be the role of the Rwandan and Congolese diaspora in advocating for justice and peace?
Yeah, I say it a lot, and I truly, truly believe it, that
Mhm.
Silence in the face of injustice, it's not neutrality, it's complicity.
True.
People who stay silent, they're not bystanders, they become part of the problem. So, and that includes people who are not members of the Rwandan or Congolese diaspora, like anybody. We are all part of the international community, yeah? You and me, everyone.
Mhm.
But the diaspora. I'm a member of the Armenian diaspora, so I know the power of a diaspora. Yeah, the diaspora is like the greatest natural resource, I think, of a country when there is a large one. Yeah, so the diaspora, Rwandan and Congolese, I don't think they realize the power that they have. They have freedom, they have the freedom, they have the access, they have the resources to amplify the truth and to push for international accountability or regime change. Even though, of course, it's scary because Paul Kagame goes after, it doesn't matter, he doesn't care, he'll go after you if you're outside, but you're safer on the outside still than you are on the inside. So you can't
Yes.
take that for granted. Yeah. A member of the diaspora can mobilize, can educate, can connect global actors to the realities on the ground, and they can speak out. They can advocate really internationally in ways that those inside often cannot. And so there's a certain level at which I think if you're privileged to be a member of the diaspora, you almost have a heightened responsibility to do more, you know? And because you can.
Yes, indeed.
Like you do. And it's powerful. It's really, really powerful. Now, if you take
Yeah.
several members who can amplify each other, this is why people like Paul Kagame are scared. This is why they behave the way they do, because you have so much more power than you think you do. And he knows it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say like tap into that. Tap into
Indeed, I think the diaspora often forgets the power that they have, like you said, the freedom, the resources, and the opportunity and the means to bring real change and good change to the countries of origin. And we should indeed take advantage of all of that and come together and try and keep on pushing for change and also keep on advocating. And we have the platforms. I mean, like everybody now has a phone and a platform, so it's not that complicated to do. Just of course there's some danger to it, but I mean everything has a price, and
exactly.
everything
Exactly.
has a price, and I think the price of you cannot put a price on freedom and peace. Like it's something much more bigger than all of us. It's something for the future generations. So it's really worth fighting for. Um, and not only the diaspora, but we also have the elite in Rwanda. What would you say about them? Like the ones who are in the country, but um, they are in Rwanda, but they are part of the elite, so they can also bring some change, don't you think?
Course. I mean, for me, the elite, the intelligentsia inside Rwanda, Victoire is one of them. She's extremely brave. But those within Rwanda, they have an even heavier responsibility, because people look up to them. These are the real leaders of the community. And so when they're silent, you really can't mistake that for neutrality. It's really almost a form of endorsement. I mean, even the cases I worked on during the Rwandan, at the Rwandan ICTR, the leaders, the elites who said, I didn't do anything, I didn't say anything. Yeah, okay, but you you were supposed to. So, and they literally were found guilty of genocide for not doing anything, they have to use their privilege to push for something better. If you're a member of the elite and you're benefiting from this massive repression, corruption, you're part of the problem. I mean, and there's just no way around it.
Mm.
And so, you know, you can, it's scary, and it's scarier because you're on the inside and you know what could come. But collective, if you work collectively, it's an unstoppable power. At the same time, it's going to take someone to act alone first or in a small group first. Yeah. The collective doesn't just spontaneously form. It's usually, almost always, a single person who decides not to look away, or a brave few who decide to speak when no one else will. And then this has a domino effect through inspiration. So, just
Yeah.
the sense of helplessness and the sense of, oh, there's nothing I can do and I just need to protect my family. I mean, is this kind of Rwanda you want to live in for real? With the intelligence that you have, to the elite, I would say,
Yes.
think about the future of your children.
Yes.
The future.
Yes, that's true. And I always talk about the legacy, like we are here for a short period of time. And it's important to think about what kind of legacy will I leave behind. I mean, if you leave behind the legacy of being quiet, and being behind a dictator that is causing so much pain, so much suffering to the entire region, and who would feel okay with that? No, nobody should feel okay with that. If you have the means, if you have a possibility to bring change, and this is a message for the elite in Rwanda, you should bring change. You should make sure you do something to bring change, because this is not a legacy you want to leave behind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad we agree on that one. So, and you said that they can be collective actions or individual efforts. That is up to everyone to decide for themselves. There are so many things we can say about Rwanda and the dictatorship, but I think time is not on our side. So before we end our conversation, I would like to talk about hope. Is there hope? Like, given the current tensions, do you believe that peace is achievable in the Great Lakes region?
Of course I do. Of course. I would never not. Otherwise, I would just lock myself in a room and never come out. I always believe peace is possible. And it's kind of inevitable. I really think, I really believe that. I also don't think it's going to come easily in the context of the Great Lakes region. It's the pain and the trauma is so deep that even if you end the war today, there's going to be a massive reckoning with everything that's happened, and this goes on for even long before. The people of the Great Lakes region really deserve a chance, a future. The generations to come deserve it. But impunity has prevailed for way too long. So of course, peace is possible, but it's going to require serious will on that, not just by political will, but the will of the people to address this injustice and to have the courage and the commitment to really put their lives on the line if they have to for that. And there's going to be a need for massive healing. And there are ways of doing that. I work on transitional justice and reconciliation, truth telling, and dealing with trauma. Rwanda has seen periods of that as well. So there's definitely hope. And I really think that hope lies with the people of Rwanda.
Absolutely. And once Paul Kagame is gone and the dictatorship is dismantled, and there's going to be a lot of work to do. I mean, like you said, steps will have to be taken to put the country back on the right track, because for now, politically, economically, and socially, the very fabric of Rwanda has been deeply damaged. There's so much trauma that hasn't been acknowledged yet. Many Rwandans still aren't allowed to speak openly about what happened to them or their families, because Paul Kagame's regime was involved in so many of those atrocities. I mean, like human rights abuses have been happening continuously since the RPF took power. This is no secret to anyone, with so many reports that we have seen throughout these years. And we also have the economical aspect of things. We see how things are deteriorating even more now, especially with the sanctions that are starting to take effect. So there is a priority of bringing people together, also helping people heal, and working collectively together as Rwandans, but also non-Rwandans, and starting to imagine and build a future without Paul Kagame. We are at the end of our conversation, Sheila, and I wanted to ask you if you have a message for the listeners before we close.
I have so much I want to say, but one message. Really, I don't want anyone to underestimate the power that they have inside of them and the power of their voice, the power. Whether you're part of the diaspora, whether you're part, living in the region, whether you're watching from afar, even if you're not Rwandan, even if you're not Congolese, but especially if you are, your voice doesn't just matter, it is earth-shattering, life-changing. So every time we choose to speak, it's not a drop in the ocean, it's a butterfly effect. It's a massive shift in the balance. My message would be like, be brave, just be brave, because change only comes when someone decides enough and it is enough and then acts on it. Be brave.
Wonderful. Very powerful. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, everyone who tuned in today, and heartfelt thank you to our incredible guest, Sheila Paylan. Sheila, we deeply appreciate your time, your insights, and your unwavering commitment to truth and justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
As we close, let us remember this. Rwanda's story is one of unimaginable tragedy, but also of strength and resilience. Its people deserve more than authoritarian rule. They deserve a future rooted in justice, transparency, and a genuine respect for human rights. Paul Kagame's regime has come at a terrible cost. Lives lost, freedoms denied, voices silenced, both in Rwanda and far beyond its borders. What could have been a model of post-conflict transformation has instead become a cautionary tale. Now it is time for the international community to stop looking the other way. Now it is time to act, not just for Rwanda, but for the entire Great Lakes region of Africa. What the world must not support is the continued preservation of power under dictatorship. And let us not forget, silence is no longer an option. As we say in Kinyarwanda, Imana ifasha uwifashije. God helps those who help themselves. So I call on each one of you, everyone who believes in democracy, dignity, and the rule of law, to reject complicity through silence. Raise your voice, speak truth to power, stand in solidarity with those who cannot speak freely. Thank you all for listening, and see you all next time.